can never tell with the kind of weather that you get here. A big crowd have turned up to see the first day of the two-day meeting here at Manfield, the third of the Wynns series, and all classes, Formula 1, Formula 2, junior production and senior production, to be decided today in terms of the points. Some of them are very close. The Formula 1, of course, will be the highlight of the day, but before we get to that, we have the Suzuki Masters. And Brian Lawrence, this is a class of racing that we've seen in car racing for years and years, where you get equivalent motorcycles and try and pick the difference between the rider's ability.
Yes, Tony. Well, basically, the series was set up very late in our actual program for the Wynns series, but they're basically stock standard GSXR 750 Suzukis. The class is open. We had the first round at the Jeff Perry Memorial Race at Pukekohe a couple of weeks ago, and Bob Toomey leads the series on 15 points. We've got two of the Masters races today. The Canadian-based expatriate New Zealander Gary Goodfellow is second on 12. Eddie Kattenberg, a real charger from Wellington, is third on 10. Tony McMurdo on 8, and Robbie Dean on 6. And I think that Robbie Dean, the way in which he's riding at the moment, particularly the way in which he went at Whanganui, he's certainly going to be a real charger in this race. I think we're looking at a very strong race between Toomey, Goodfellow, Kattenberg and Robbie Dean.
All the motorcycles in the class, the new GSX-R 750 from Suzuki. An excellent improvement on the last model of Suzuki, which wasn't slow in its own right. This one reduced from somewhere around 210 kilos to about 176 or 180, depending on what's on it. But a very, very light motorcycle with enormous horsepower. And in the Castrol 6-hour for practice and even in the race, they were down to lap times around this Manfield circuit of 1:14, which was a second and a half to 2 seconds better than the previous year's Castrol 6-hour times for the 750 class. And Peter Clifford, looking at the improvement, one wonders where it's going to stop with these Japanese motorcycles, because I remember when Katanas came out and when the GPZ 900 came out, everybody says, what an amazing improvement. They can't do this again next year, but they continue to do so.
I was talking to Glenn Williams yesterday about the 900 Kawasaki, and he was saying that he couldn't believe how hard it was to ride a 900 Kawasaki against the current batch of 750s, the Suzukis that we see racing here in this event, and the FZ 750 Yamahas. But these machines, very, very good bikes now, and with the aluminium frames and the racing type handling, the full twin discs on the front and everything, they really do perform superbly. And they're a cross really between a road bike and a Formula 1 racing machine, such as we see in the Formula 1 World Championships in Europe. But who's going to win this race is a very, very good question indeed, because Gary Goodfellow's had a bit of an up and down series so far in the other production races, and I'm sure that he'll want to show just what he can do. But there's many other of the local New Zealand guys who are going to be trying to keep him out of the picture.
Just looking at the grid, letter A there is Gary Goodfellow. 45 is Alan Ramage, who's been going exceptionally well in the series so far, with very well at both Hamilton and Whanganui, most of the classes. There's Bob Toomey, number 3, who's the current leader with 15 points. 21 is Eddie Kattenberg, 38 is Robbie Dean. Robbie Dean on 6 points, Eddie Kattenberg on 10.
And P there, Terry Paviel, he's had a very unlucky series so far. I'm sure that he wants to pull something out of the bag. He's got something to prove. 172
is Ricky Henry, who's just been out in the junior production class just a little while ago, going exceptionally well, obviously in good form today. A relatively small field with all the motorcycles the same, and the theory of this is that it comes down strictly to rider ability. Look for Gary Goodfellow to get a good start. That has been his forte. One of the men behind this series, a well-known motorcyclist of the past and supporter of motorcycling for many years, Rod Coleman, gets our best wishes today. He's unfortunately in Rotorua Hospital at the moment. He was taken ill a couple of days ago. I'm sure he will have found a television set to be able to watch these machines perform. All of the motorcycle manufacturers and distributors in New Zealand have been keen on motorcycle racing and support the production classes, but probably none more so than Suzuki over recent years. Perhaps fitting that they can have a series with their own machines, which this year are virtually unbeatable. Perhaps next year it'll be somebody else's machine that's unbeatable. When the Kawasaki GPZ came out, it was the same. The flag drops, they're away in the Suzuki Masters, an 8-lap race. Screaming up to that first corner. Eddie Kattenberg got a good start.
I think it's Pavior's going to try and come around the outside, but no, he's rounded up by Toomey and Holden. Toomey on the inside, Holden tries to round up Kattenberg on the outside.
The lap record here for Formula 1 bikes is only 1:10.4, and these bikes are capable of low 1:14s, to give you some idea of how competitive they are as stock standard production bikes. Bob Toomey, Eddie Kattenberg, Robbie Dean behind them. Gary Goodfellow trying to get up there, almost losing it. And putting Robbie Dean off just a little. He's dropped back one. Gary Goodfellow up to 4th place. But it's Bob Toomey they've got to chase at the moment. Toomey, Kattenberg, Henry. It's Ricky Henry, 172.
Great start from Toomey, though, and Kattenberg, both getting straight down to it. Goodfellow's got a bit to make up on the leading two. He can't afford to let them get away like this.
Bob Toomey and Eddie Kattenberg both know each other's racing style very, very well indeed. Have raced together for many years. And they were just talking a little while ago in the pits about the weight advantage that Eddie Kattenberg has. Bob Toomey, a very, very slightly built fellow. So if anything, he has a little weight advantage over Eddie Kattenberg, who's quite a big and strapping fellow.
I think one of the better rides coming in this race is from 172, Ricky Henry. He's really on the job at the moment.
Almost lost it there.
Of course, Bob Toomey was the rider who co-rode with Robert Holden in the recent 6-hour production race here, and they led the race on a couple of occasions, but suffered the misfortune of miscalculating the fuel consumption of the GSX and ran out of fuel on 2 occasions. But Kattenberg has very much shown form this year, and he's a very, very aggressive rider, carrying a little more weight than what Bob Toomey is, but certainly as far as enthusiasm is concerned, he's right there with him, and he certainly doesn't plan on letting the Wellington rider get away with too much. But there's Gary Goodfellow coming up to challenge Ricky Henry for 3rd position at the moment. But Peter Clifford, I think Ricky Henry's really showing some form we haven't seen for a while.
Yes, he is. He's running absolutely superbly. He had a nasty slide in the beginning of this lap, but it doesn't seem to have let him put him off at all, and he's coming back at the leading 2 now, and certainly keeping Goodfellow out of the picture. But there's Kattenberg right on Toomey's tail now as they come down the front straight. Be right in his slipstream and looking to pull out of the slipstream and use that to rush past. Pulling up alongside Toomey, trying to be late on the brakes, but Toomey, the lighter man, can brake every bit as late. Shuts out Kattenberg.
One of the reasons for the sliding tail ends on these bikes on occasions on this Manfield circuit, a lot of riders have spoken about the fact that most of the circuit goes one way, so one side of the tyre profile is warm while the other is cool. You go from right hand to left hand, and often you get a big tail slide that you're not expecting. The more experienced riders know about these things. Eddie Kattenberg having a go at Bob Toomey. Toomey riding flawlessly.
And you can just see how evenly matched these men, and Kattenberg having a bit of a problem there, having a lot of juddering, trying to be later on the brakes than Toomey. You can see how evenly matched the machines are. There's nothing in it in top speed, just as they should be. They're all standard production bikes.
But the gap between racing machines and standard production machines at the top end of the market becomes ever smaller. Toomey and Kattenberg still with that battle. Gary Goodfellow still trying for all his worth, but not really close enough to them. They're on lap times of 1:15.3, 1:15.2, the one before that. So very, very quick times.
Toomey doing a great job here. When you're pressured so hard from behind, it's very difficult to keep your cool and do everything right, but that's exactly what Toomey's doing, and Kattenberg is trying everything he knows to get past, but he's got to think up something new if he's going to get past number 3 in front.
Certainly can't do it with horsepower, as Peter Clifford has already explained. Being standard production bikes, they're within an ace of each other in terms of horsepower and acceleration. Comes down to the rider, Eddie Kattenberg having a go this time, but Toomey can brake later. Gary Goodfellow, I think, has just slipped into 3rd place. Have a look as they come out of this corner. Toomey, Kattenberg looking back for Ricky Henry. In fact, it's Goodfellow who's in front of him into third place.
Henry had a good run there in third place, but Goodfellow, perhaps a little keener, has got past. Be interesting to see if he can close the gap on the leading duo.
All taking very, very similar race lines. Robbie Dean hanging in there in fifth place.
He's just ahead of Alan Ramage. But Kattenberg still looking for a way past Toomey. What he's got to do now is he's not significantly faster than Toomey in any one section, and he's going to have to put together a series of about 3 corners and try and make up a bit of ground on each of them for a very well thought out passing manoeuvre. The desperate out-braking stuff hasn't worked. He's already tried that one. And Toomey doesn't seem to be making any mistakes, so he's really got to build up to it. And one place he might think of doing that is to go down the back straight and get through the big sweeper a little bit faster than Toomey if he's brave enough to do it, and then that might enable him to pull alongside Toomey coming up the start and finish straight with the aid of the slipstream, but it's not an easy thing to do.
Yes, Peter, I haven't noticed either of them trying the different lines. There are 2 substantially different lines at this corner at the end of the straight here that they're just entering. One is to go very high on the entry and the other is to go low, and there doesn't seem to be a great deal between them. One works for some people and one for other people, as we've seen in previous races here. It's all to do with the entry and the exit speed. Here's Eddie Kattenberg having a go in a straight line again, but once again he has to get on the brakes a little earlier.
Yes, you're right. I think he has got to try a different line. He's going to have to go on a later apex. He's going to have to be slower into the corner somewhere but faster out and use that drive to at least pull alongside Toomey, because unless he's alongside him, he's not going to be able to outbrake him. And already Kattenberg has to fear that he's coming under pressure from Goodfellow, who seems to be closing that gap slowly.
At the current rate of closing the gap, Gary Goodfellow is only just going to make their tails by the finish line, so he has to pull something out of the bag as well. Perhaps he's got the Formula 1 races later in the afternoon on his mind.
The gap between first and third at the moment is around about 1.6 seconds, and Gary Goodfellow's maintained this deficit for the last 2 laps, so perhaps he's certainly got a big job on his hand, there's no doubt about it. But under brakes, Bob Toomey is definitely he's better than Kattenberg at the moment, although you can see that Kattenberg's probably lost about 8 or 10 lengths on Toomey at the moment, but he's very, very smooth through this corner, and this seems to be where he's picking up time on Toomey through here, but he seems to be losing it in the entrance going into the back straight.
Yes, Toomey's made the break now, a very useful margin. With only 2 laps to go, Kattenberg really does have to pull something out the bag.
I think there's probably more for Eddie Kattenberg to worry about, with Gary Goodfellow right behind him, than catching Toomey, because Toomey seems to have the better of him.
And he hasn't put a foot wrong through the entire race, and in the cut and thrust that there's been through this production race, it's really exceptional performance.
Yes, I noticed early on that Eddie Kattenberg was perhaps closer to the ragged edge than Bob Toomey was. Bob Toomey has looked tidier, and perhaps just that overstressing of himself for Eddie Kattenberg has made him think twice about it. Although he's starting to get closer again. Gary Goodfellow getting closer to them. We'll get a gap between first and third. And just there's Gary Goodfellow's gone.
Yes, and I'd suggest that was the front brake. Perhaps he tried to hold it on too long going into the corner, and the front wheel tucked under him, because he'd probably still be on the brakes at that point.
Let's have a look at it again. This one, but as we've seen in previous years, several riders have come off at great speed and been able to get up and okay again. It's all a question of getting away from the bike so that it doesn't hit you and you don't come into contact with a solid object.
Well, it's still just under a second now between the race leader Bob Toomey and 21 Eddie Kattenberg, and second position. This is the final lap. There's only about a quarter of a lap to go, and it looks like Bob Toomey, the man who's dominated this from start to finish, and the winner at Pukekohe a couple of weeks ago, it looks like he's going to notch another 15 points up for this one. He's already got 15, 3 ahead of Gary Goodfellow, who saw all chance of his points disappear down the road with the Suzuki a few moments ago.
Bob Toomey still under pressure from Eddie Kattenberg. A competitor right to the checkered flag. First Bob Toomey, second Eddie Kattenberg, looking back for third place, and it's Robbie Dean who comes through in third, having got ahead of Ricky Henry. Good ride from Ricky Henry, who, as we said before, has really come from nowhere. Had one excellent race this morning on the smaller bike. Come out and been competitive again this afternoon. But Bob Toomey, as we've said previously in the series, in his comeback year, back to his very best form and really a force to be reckoned with. The weather and the racing so far. We're about to start the first leg today of Formula One in the third round. This is the third and final round, the two-day meeting here at the Manfield circuit. And that's as the points stand at the moment. Paul Pavlitic with quite a commanding lead over Phil Payne with 57, Bruce Woodley on 54, and Glenn Williams on 47. So second, third and fourth can battle out for the points, but I think first is fairly well decided. A little bit of a false start there. They're being brought back. Bill Cooney on the front row with Bruce Woodley, Phil Payne, Paul Pavlitic. Here's the sprint up to the first corner.
And for the first time, Phil Payne hasn't got away well. It's Bill Cooney who leads on the 600 Merowaki, and I think Phil Payne had his hand up at the back of the field, so that's one of the leading contenders out.
Phil Payne was having some trouble with the machine trying to make it handle at this circuit. They had most of those things sorted out. And Paul Pavlitic, who has the points lead, we understand, might be in a spot of bother with running out of revs on this circuit. The bike was fine for Wanganui and Hamilton, where they don't wind up too many high revs before changing gear, whereas on this circuit he tends to run out just a little.
And just saw Pavlitic nick into second place, taking Bruce Woodley, pushing Bruce Woodley out of second, so it's Cooney that still leads from Pavlitic and Woodley.
And Paul Pavlitic has the option later in the day, if the other bikes prove too fast for him, he has the option of borrowing David Ogden's Yamaha TZ350. Thinks he's going to try it first on his own Formula 2 bike, and if it's not working properly, or if it's not competitive enough, he's going to change it for a TZ350, which is competitive in this class.
Woodley goes fast. Great piece of out-braking manoeuvre from Woodley. Passes Pavlitic, but Cooney's already getting away. Woodley also fears that the 250 doesn't have enough pace down the straight, and Cooney seems to be proving them right. Pulling away as W. Woodley sweeps through the corner ahead of Pavlitic in third place.
Bruce Woodley on the brand new TZ250, the latest model, which is more than a match for a TZ350 because of the lack of development with 350s. A good 250 these days is as fast on a circuit as a 350, which is the reason why 350s have now been included in Formula 2 racing. Bruce Woodley was just a little bit of a moment there. Got it straight again.
Very deep, late braking into the corner. You saw the back end hopping off the ground. But the model of 250 that Woodley's using there, that's Pavlitic number 4. Woodley's using the latest end model Yamaha, and quite a lot of the runners in Europe have had trouble making these things go as fast as they should. And Woodley's saying that it won't rev as much as he expected it to. Only the Works 250N, the latest model Yamahas, are really been competitive, and Cooney already getting away on the Merowaki Kawasaki. Pavlitic coming under pressure now from number 58, Peter Fowler.
Bill Cooney, who had some engine problems at Wanganui, is hoping that it would last today on the very popular choice of the Merowaki 500 forward to 600 Kawasaki engine, a hybrid. Seems to be very, very quick on this Manfield circuit. We had him practicing at around 14.9.15, which in yesterday's windy conditions was very good indeed.
And Payne now up behind Pavlitic. That's Phil Payne up into 4th place from his atrocious start. This bike has got off the line very well up to this point in the series, but he had a very bad start, Payne, and he's now pushed his way through the field and is up into 4th place and challenging Pavlitic.
Well, that's a superb ride from Phil Payne. The bike that doesn't look as glossy in the finish as some of the other more modern machines. The one that he's built up himself, the one that he feared would run out of revs. Doesn't look as though he's having too much problem in that direction. It drives out of corners extraordinarily well.
It's Payne looking for the run round the outside, coming into the start straight once again, but he's certainly got a very, very good recovery there from a bad start, and at the moment he lies about 1.6 seconds behind the race leader, Bruce Woodley. The expatriate New Zealander now based, and Phil Payne, 22, moves into 2nd position. Ahead of 4, Paul Pavlitic on the Ginge Malloy built Yamaha, but there's certainly no doubt about the ride that's coming there from 7. Bill Cooney, who ran very well in last year's Formula 2 series.
There's Bruce Woodley, the race leader, pulled out. My apologies. Bill Cooney, the race leader. Bruce Woodley in 2nd place. Here's Bill Cooney, number 7, the race leader. Bruce Woodley, there's the margin to him in 2nd place. And here's the battle of the race, 3rd, 4th and 5th places. Payne still ahead of Paul Pavlitic. Quite an unusual engine in this machine.
Yes, Phil Payne has the top end of an old 700cc Yamaha engine, half of 700cc's being 350, and that's what he's got in this bike on the more usual TZ350 bottom end, and it certainly seems to be working well.
He's been experimenting with the reed valve induction. Not making a great deal of impression on Bruce Woodley at this stage, but pulling away slightly from Paul Pavlitic.
It's Dallas Rankin that's putting in a big challenge there around the outside on the Ducati. He's more renowned for his exploits on the production Ducatis, and certainly a man that knows them inside out, and he's taken Pavlitic now to move up another place. They've imported a lot of parts from Europe for this bike, and they've spent most of the winter time getting it all together and getting it sorted out. They ran it during last year's series where it was reasonably successful, but they've obviously got it well and truly sorted now with all the expertise that Dallas Rankin has as an engine builder, and it's certainly paying off here today.
Yes, Rankin has had a couple of problems with this machine through the series. He had ignition trouble at Wanganui, but it's certainly going well now. But Phil Payne doing very well on his 350 Yamaha. Pavlitic, the series leader, well out of the top running positions here, but all he wants is to accrue a few points just to hang on to that lead.
So I think with what Paul Pavlitic was saying prior to the race, that we may see him tomorrow on a 350. His Formula 2 bike, as he had feared, not especially competitive.
He was working out that he only needed a few 5th places to tie this up, but he's being pushed further and further down the field at the moment, and he's going to be lucky to hang on to his lead if he can't better this performance in the last couple of rounds. And Woodley there well behind Bill Cooney, the leader. Phil Payne now coming under pressure from Dallas Rankin in 3rd place.
This is a tremendous ride from Dallas Rankin on the Ducati. Watching him in practice, he looked very quick and quite confident and nice line. But I didn't really expect the bike to foot it with the front runners in this F2 race.
No, he's doing very well on it. Of course, that's the 600cc V-twin air-cooled 4-stroke, number 165, chasing number 22 here, which is the 2-stroke twin-cylinder water-cooled machine. So that red bike is the big 600cc V-twin 4-stroke.
Being a V-twin and a 4-stroke, it has excellent drive out of the corners, good low-end torque. The problem with them in the past is that it tends to run out at the top end. This doesn't seem to. Having an excellent race with Phil Payne. Pushing him every which way now.
Be interesting to see who has the top speed down the straight. They seem very evenly matched there.
Dallas Rankin's bike just starting to puff a little blue smoke, which wasn't there at the initial stages of the race.
Race leader Bill Cooney now some 5 seconds ahead of Bruce Woodley in second position, and a gap of 3.5 seconds back to third position, which is being very hotly contested between 22 Payne and Dallas Rankin on the 600 Ducati.
It was the broken primary chain that put Bill Cooney out of the race, the Formula 2 race at Wanganui. He was leading the race. We watched him lead the race right up until the closing stages when the primary chain broke, but he was very fortunate that when the primary chain failed, it just dropped into the bottom of the engine and didn't wreck the whole thing. So he's been able to repair it for today's meeting, and it certainly seems to have been worthwhile for him because he's now once more out in front.
Really is a far bigger margin of advantage than you would expect in a Formula 2 race. Certainly this Manfield circuit seems suited to he and the machine, and he's consolidating on his excellent practice times with a very substantial margin now. Look at that margin back to Bruce Woodley, and Bruce Woodley's not slow.
And I think it looks as though Woodley's gradually being overhauled by both Payne and Rankin. Yes, very definitely being closed up. We don't know what sort of start that Rankin had, but Payne certainly had a bad start, and the way that Rankin's been able to keep up with Payne, maybe he had to come from the back of the field as well, and both of them now closing in on Woodley. It's going to be really exciting battle to the finish between these three.
There's no question about the margin of the leader, Bill Cooney, on the Moriwaki 600. Well out in the lead, and provided he doesn't make any mistakes and the bike holds up, he's really going to be unchallenged. The race looks to be for second, third and fourth places. Bruce Woodley having a look at the back of the machine there. He may have just been looking to see who was behind him, but it seemed to me as though he looked down at the back of the machine. Maybe he has a problem. Bill Payne started to close on him, and Dallas Rankin coming with him.
Well, Bill Cooney now has extended his lead to some 8.5 seconds over Bruce Woodley, but there's only a gap of 1.5 seconds between Woodley and Payne, with Dallas Rankin lurking in the background. The big 600 Ducati taking a while to wind up, but certainly showing its legs toward the end of the back straight, and he just doesn't quite seem to have that little edge that he needs to get right on the tail of Phil Payne. But Payne would only have to make just a small error, which he doesn't make very often, and Dallas Rankin would be right there with him.
Phil Payne's the man you may remember seeing in the Boxing Day coverage from Wanganui, doing a little motocross leap over the edge of a curve where he and the machine got about 5 or 6 feet in the air, and he continued on. It was immediately after Bruce Woodley had just crashed. But Bill Cooney riding a superb race and just pulling more and more advantage as second, third and fourth places dice with each other.
Yeah, this Go Motorsport Moriwaki Kawasaki certainly seems to be the machine to beat. And Cooney riding it very, very well ahead of Woodley, who's gradually being overhauled by Payne and Rankin. Rankin seems to have got back on terms with Payne a little bit more than he was a couple of laps ago.
The engine in Bill Cooney's Moriwaki Kawasaki, the race leader, very similar to the one that Paul Pavlitic used in a similar Formula 2 bike last year. Unfortunately, his blew up.
So here goes Payne, still trying to keep both ahead of Rankin and with his eyes firmly on Woodley's tail.
Phil Payne has ridden exceptionally well throughout this series, Peter.
Yes, he has. It's not the latest machinery by any means, but he's making great use of it.
Which goes to show that you don't really need a limitless checkbook to be competitive in this form of motorsport.
No, Payne's an old campaigner, and there goes the leader, race leader Bill Cooney. But Payne's an old campaigner, and he's done a lot of Grand Prix mechanicking. He's picked up a lot of knowledge around the years, and he's put that into good effect building this bike. Woodley's no slouch though either, and he's managing to keep his 250 ahead of the 350 Yamaha and the 600 Ducati behind him.
Had somebody off the track, right down by the sweeper. In fact, I think it's Dallas Rankin we've lost from the front runners at this stage. Just overdoing it, yes, Dallas Rankin's bike down.
Dallas obviously okay, standing up there with his having taken his helmet off, more worried about the state of his machine, but that's the leader, Bill Cooney.
Checkered flag this time for Bill Cooney. A substantial race lead for Bill Cooney, consolidated as the race went on and ending up with about 9.2 seconds to second place.
And a great second place from Bruce Woodley, but where's Phil Payne on? Paul Pavlitic takes third place because Phil Payne's had trouble on the last lap. Yes, Pavlitic came through to take third, and Phil Payne well down the field, having run off the track, got back on the circuit and finished about sixth. So that was all drama on the last lap, with Rankin crashing and Payne running off the circuit.
Which is good for Paul Pavlitic. While it might be bad for those who have crashed, Paul Pavlitic will retain his points lead. Bill Cooney was only on 24 points, whereas Pavlitic was on 77. He was a good 20 points clear of Phil Payne in second place, and Phil Payne with a DNF is not going to improve on that. Bruce Woodley will now be his closest rival.
But a great ride from Bill Cooney. First class performance, never put a foot wrong, led almost from the start, and he gets a shake of congratulations from Paul Pavlitic.
Really didn't put a foot wrong, did he?
No, superb ride, and Pavlitic, wearing his Sivagagi Superman suit there, still retains the series lead, and in fact probably has pulled away a little bit. Woodley picked up some good points for second place, but with Pavlitic handily taking third, it hasn't done him any harm at all, and
yes.
That's Dallas Rankin on the back of the pickup truck with his bike.
Yes, Payne was 20 points behind Pavlitic and Woodley was 23 points behind, so it puts Woodley just slightly closer and Pavlitic really keeping a very comfortable lead. We'll be back in just a moment after this commercial break with a 250 spectators. Sprint racing to the long distance or Castrol 6-hour racing. I think it's definitely an understatement, Brian Lawrence. He would probably be the best sprint racer and best sprint starter we've had in the country for a long time.
Yes, there's certainly no doubt about the ability of Glenn Williams. I can remember going back, watching him in his early days aboard the 3-cylinder H2 Kawasaki's when Graham Crosby was also starting his career, and it certainly is a very, very impressive lineup of New Zealand riders that we have had overseas during the past, and certainly for a small country, New Zealand certainly does deserve a very high placing in the sporting levels of the world. There's no doubt there.
Okay, on the grid now, the 250 production race. Leading competitors in this, just looking at the points. Alan Ramage has 42, Mike Webb 29, Aaron Slight 28, John Boot 26, Terry Paville 24, and Bob Toomey 18. So very, very close. Definitely a series to be won on the last round here. Look at the sprint up to the first corner.
And it's Aaron Slight who's taken the lead on the RZ250 Yamaha. A great start from Slight, absolutely superb. But he's already got rounded up by the 250 Kawasaki and deposed. Back in the lead again goes Slight.
Excellent racing in the 250 production. Again, all the bikes supposedly equivalent in horsepower and performance. Comes down to rider ability. And this is where the young upcoming stars of New Zealand motorcycle racing will come from. One or two names that have come out of the blue already. Aaron Slight is one of them, the race leader at the moment. He's only 19. Started motocross racing when he was 13 and gave it away at 16. So he had a good background, and he's been road racing for 18 months and already starting to show through as one of the upcoming stars of New Zealand motorsport. We may even be able to have a word with him at the end of this race. But Aaron Slight is certainly one, Brian Lawrence, that I would be looking to perhaps be on the bigger production machines, if not F1 and 2 bikes.
Yes, for sure, Tony. I think the performance that he put in particular at Wanganui, nobody was more surprised than he to find himself on the winner's dais at the end of the Formula One race. But under the very experienced eye of the Gregory team from Masterton, he certainly has got a lot of experience behind him in the form of team managers and mechanics, etc., to look after him. But he's a very steady rider. He makes very, very few mistakes, and he's been prepared to start in the smaller class, move up to the bigger bikes. But I think he's really having his work cut out at the moment.
Very, very close racing indeed in the 250 production. They make very, very quiet racing. In fact, many of the spectators don't even know they're on the circuit. After the Formula 1 and Formula 2, the very noisy machines, these little production machines are very, very quiet indeed. Wayne Marshall in second place. 730 on the Kawasaki.
It's a great battle between these two, the 250 Yamaha leading and the 250 Kawasaki of Wayne Marshall in second place. Battling tooth and nail for the lead.
Those people who have watched Wanganui for a few years may remember this fellow in second place, Wayne Marshall, doing exceptionally well in previous years, going back 3 or 4 years now, on a trail bike, 250 trail bike. In fact, I remember him leading the race for a couple of laps before he was overhauled by some of the bigger and more experienced riders.
Wayne Marshall is, of course, from Wanganui, so he obviously knew where he was going, and he seems to know where he's going around Manfield as well.
Manfield, not the easiest circuit in the world to learn for a new rider. Very precise lines required here, and it's one of those circuits where both on bikes and in cars you get to an optimum lap speed and then try going faster, and often that means you go slower.
But Slight riding very, very well now. He seems to have picked himself up a bit, has sorted his lines out from the first couple of laps where Marshall was able to make ground on him, and there's little that Marshall can do now. And Marshall about, in fact, to come under pressure from Terry Paviel in third place on the 250 Suzuki. So that's Yamaha leading with Slight, Kawasaki, Marshall in second place, and Suzuki, Paviel in third.
Terry Paviel having a quick look behind him as well. He's made up a lot of ground. Didn't get a particularly good start, but he's worked his way through the field.
Paviel had a very, very difficult season in England, a lot of bad luck, and was determined to make better luck for himself in this series, and he's had an up and down series. He was good in the 250 production races at Wanganui, and is doing even better now, up into third place and closing on the second man.
Terry Paviel, an interesting character who actually learned his trade riding push bikes. He used to be very much involved in the cycling community, and then made the transition to motorcycles without having gone through the apprenticeship of motocross that a lot of the younger riders come through. He went to England and was under the care there of a well-known New Zealander, Stu Avant, for quite a long time, who showed them a lot of the ropes and a lot of the professional tricks. He got some good sponsorship, but as Peter Clifford has just said, did not have a very successful season this last one. About to overtake Wayne Marshall, trying it right on the end. Who gets on the brakes later? He's there and holds the line, so up to second place, Terry Paviel. He's got quite a chase on his hands to try and catch Aaron Slight.
Paviel's passing manoeuvre there, a combination of the fact that the 250 Suzuki did seem a fraction quicker on top end, but he got a better drive out of the corner. He was late into it and drove onto the straight well.
Terry Paviel was one of the people in practice this morning who was trying a number of different lines around that corner. He tried it high entry and tight exit, and he tried it the other way around 2 or 3 different times to try and establish which was the quicker.
Paviel now pulling away very slightly from Wayne Marshall, if anything, but he's got to really work hard if he's going to get on terms with the lead Aaron Slight. Paviel's got the prospect of a very good ride ahead of him in Europe next season. He's going over to ride for the Exactwell team, who are building a completely new engine for him.
And when you consider the experience that he's had overseas, it is even more praise to be heaped on Aaron Slight.
Yes, Slight's been riding very, very well, both on the 750 Yamaha production bike and this smaller 250 machine. Absolutely, totally different machines, but he's been doing equally well on both of them, and it's a real testament to his ability to be able to jump off one bike and on the other. But Paviel P now chasing him very, very hard.
He's certainly closing in on Aaron Slight now. He's back to within less than a second behind our race leader, 111 Aaron Slight on the Yamaha. Terry Paviel on the Suzuki. This is the exit from the back straight into a very fast sweeping right-hander. A rather awkward corner. And Paviel really starting to move in on him now. In fact, he's picking him up under brakes and just a little bit faster through the turns. The straight line speed of the two motorcycles, the Yamaha and the Suzuki, fairly much the same. But this is where Paviel is starting to peg him back. And Wayne Marshall still in third position aboard the Kawasaki. He was up into second. A brilliant start there right from the drop of the flag. Paviel coming through from the back. Aaron Slight leads. Paviel second.
And bear in mind that Terry Paville had to come through the pack after a very bad start. Meanwhile, Aaron Slight has been out there and in the lead with clear road ahead of him. Got a back marker down in the S's.
That's Mike Webb, who's just crashed his 250 Yamaha. He's obviously in a little bit of pain, but not seriously injured. But back to the leaders, and that's Aaron Slight still ahead of Paville. It's the crucial moment coming when Paville may get into slight slipstream. He's too far behind him at the moment, but when he can use the fact that the front machine will push the air away and draw in the following bikes, then we'll expect to see Paville close right in, but he's still a little bit too far behind for that sort of thing to happen.
And that, of course, is a critical tactic in a race where all of the machinery is equivalent, where nobody has a clear horsepower advantage. To be able to get a slipstream is an enormous advantage.
Paville has now dropped another half-second on that last lap to, he's now 1.5 seconds behind Aaron Slight. The race starting to wind itself out now, the 250 production event. Of course, 91 Mike Webb, the rider who was down in the S's, he's sitting up now, he's standing back up on his feet, so he's quite okay. Certainly a good sign, and the protective leathers doing their job.
But Aaron Slight still leading number 111 from P. Paville. Now it looks as though Slight has responded to Paville's challenge, because he's not making ground fast enough, really. This race running towards its close, and Aaron Slight maintaining the pressure on the 250 Yamaha. Paville having a bit of a slide there as he tries to get the power of the 250 Suzuki on even earlier.
So notice he's doing that coming onto the front straight as well, off the big sweeper. He's got a much wider line than Aaron Slight.
Certainly using every inch of road in his attempt to catch up. Right out to the outside, to the curb there, driving down the back straight. But he's no closer to Slight. If anything, Slight may have pulled out a little bit of an advantage.
I think at the current rate of closing on Aaron Slight, he can only sit there, maintain the speed, and hope that Aaron Slight has a slide or makes a mistake, misses a gear change. He's just not making any impression on him in the last 2 laps. He seemed to be able to close, but as Peter said, Aaron Slight realised he was closing and responded to the challenge.
Yeah, Paville using every inch of circuit, but doesn't quite seem to be able to make any ground on the Yamaha in front of him.
This is a superb race from Aaron Slight. An excellent start, withstood the pressure initially, and has just consolidated the lead. Yes, Terry Paville really trying for all his worth, pushing very, very hard, certainly riding the bike harder than is Aaron Slight.
Now they're coming up to catch a couple of back markers, and this will be a test of Slight's experience as to how he can get past various lines to pass a slower man. And Paville may pick up a little bit there. There's one of the back markers, but Slight will probably catch him before he gets to the end of the back straight, which will be the easiest place to pass him, of course. Getting down towards the end of the back straight now, he's going to go up the inside. Doesn't spoil his line at all.
Look at how far he gets off that bike.
It was Paville, in fact, who was put offline by the tail ender. That did him no good at all. He had to go right round the outside and has lost another couple of precious yards.
Back into the Yamaha, starting to skip a little bit there under brakes. Some sections of the Manfield track here have been resealed. But certainly Aaron Slight, the man on the day here in the opening 250 production race. Very smooth. You could almost put the proverbial 20-cent coin down on the circuit and he'd run over it every time.
Absolute precision and showing a kind of experience beyond his years. Aaron Slight, the young 19-year-old, whom I'm sure if he continues in the sport, we're going to hear a lot more about in years to come. There's no weight advantage or disadvantage between the first and second riders. Terry Paville and Aaron Slight almost exactly the same size.
Yes, and certainly Paville must have realised that he's not going to catch Slight, and he's come concentrating on consolidating his second place.
The white flag coming out this time, signifying one more lap to go. Aaron Slight's the first one over the line with one to go, and the gap now at 2.65 seconds. So Terry Paville has dropped back around about 2 seconds over the last 3 laps.
Wayne Marshall still in third place, having been overtaken by Paville, who has pulled away from him since he overtook, but not by an enormous amount. Still staying in touch with the leaders.
And these, of course, are 250 production bikes, as you can buy to ride on the road, using tyres just as you can get out of the showroom on the machines.
Can't quite see where Alan Ramage is in the field, but certainly Mike Webb, after his crash, is out of contention in points, and Aaron Slight was in third place on the points with 28. Ramage had 42, Webb had 29. Paville had 24, so Aaron Slight doing no harm at all to his points here.
And I saw Ramage was in fact back in about 7th place there, so he's well down on points compared with Slight's performance. Here the leader, number 111, continuing his great performance.
Coming around this time to get the checkered flag. There is the checkered flag for Aaron Slight. The young 19-year-old, Terry Paville behind him. In third place, Wayne Marshall.
And Ramage made it up into 6th place, I think.
So Ramage will just hold on to his points lead, having finished in 6th place, but Aaron Slight a lot closer to that lead now and ahead of Mike Webb. Leading contenders, Steve Trinder, just crashing there in Hamilton, as a result of which, that's him you're looking at now, as a result of which he has a broken wrist. He's still going to try and ride. He's been doing very, very good practice times. The RGB Suzuki obviously well suited, and Brian Lawrence, probably that's the bike to beat today, certainly on paper anyway.
Yes, I would think so, Tony. When we first spoke to Steve Trinder about coming to the series, he tried to make it here last year, but an airline strike prevented him from coming in the closing stages. But he's been a very competitive man. He won the Australian 500cc road race championship this year. He won it in 1981. He's a very, very professional racer. The presentation of their machines is absolutely impeccable, both him and Craig. And I think when I spoke to him earlier on, I said to him, you know, about the race distance and how the wrist was. And he said the biggest problem is it under braking, was the actual body weight being thrown onto it. But he's trying to be as easy on it as he can, and of course with the numerous gear changes required here at Manfield, it certainly speaks mountains of the man's ability. I think, you know, madness really has to be put to one side, because he's a very sensible man. He's got his own health at stake here, but he's very keen that he can do the job. And I believe, after looking at the times he did yesterday and today, just latching onto the back of Roger Freeth, who's the national Formula 1 champion, I think that Steve Trinder could well be very much a hard man to beat around here. And also Dennis Ireland on a similar RGB Suzuki.
We spoke a little earlier to Steve Trinder about this problem of riding. He's not the first person we've seen ride with a broken arm, with a broken collarbone. It's the radius in his wrist that he's broken. And we spoke to him a little earlier about the trouble in trying to cope with a bike around here with that injury. And a damaged ankle. You were out there yesterday doing very respectable times at this circuit at Manfield. Do you like the circuit?
The circuit itself is terrific. It's more to what we used to over home, if anything. And let's face it, after the last couple of tracks, I think anything's going to look great to us.
The stress is going to be under brakes, isn't it?
Well, it is, Tone. It's under brakes. It's hard because you tend to put I'm tending to put all the weight on my right arm, but mainly through the S's, flicking from left to right. You've got to twist your wrist, and that's where I'm finding it hurting more so than the rest of it.
This bike, the RGB, should be well suited to this circuit. Do you see them as being more competitive than the super-bikes?
Yes, for sure. This is our sort of track as far as the style of bike goes. They sweep the fast corners. It's right up our alley. Bike-wise, rider-wise, well, you know, Craig, I think, will go very well here. Dennis will go very well because their bikes are suited to the track.
What about some of the superbike riders, in particular Roger Freeth, who likes this circuit, has had a lot more experience than perhaps you and Craig have had, and has a lot of horsepower in a straight line?
Well, that's the sort of thing we're fighting the whole time, Tony. Like, we come here yesterday for the first time, and we're way behind the 8 ball. These guys have done, you know, 600,000 laps around.
They're away, but it's a full start. Yes, it's a full start at the start of the race. That's Aaron Slight jumped the start and has got away off the line, but they're now pulling all the bikes back.
I think some of the riders just getting anxious down there about the bikes getting hot on the grid. They don't want them to overheat, obviously. Looking at the points in Formula 1, Roger Freeth lead with 64, Craig Trinder 53, Robbie Dean 44, Dennis Ireland 41, and Richard Scott 30. So just a lack of finish in one race is enough to take that lead away from Roger Freeth. Craig Trinder in second place, but I think that Steve Trinder, the older brother of Craig, is the man to watch on this circuit. We haven't had a Formula 1 race. We've had individual practice. We've had some lap times, none of them particularly competitive in terms of being close to the lap record, but they're close enough to make it an excellent race. Steve Trinder, as you heard just a few moments ago, is going to ride with that broken arm. He hopes that the adrenaline will overcome the pain. Almost ready for a start now. They're away. Screaming down to the first corner. Robbie Dean with a good start. A couple of them getting left back in the melee there on the start line. Dennis Ireland first to the first corner. Roger Freeth behind him, going round the outside.
That's Aaron Slight, yes, who takes second place, but somebody goes down. One of the riders on the production bike goes down, but it's Dennis Ireland who's out in front ahead of Aaron Slight. No, Roger Freeth already up into second place, deposing Slight, pushing him back to third. So Ireland's made a great start from Freeth, and with the power and handling of the 500 Suzuki, Freeth's got his work out to get the better of him, but Gary Goodfellow up into a good place. They're up in about fourth.
In the times I took yesterday in unofficial practice, Roger Freeth was the quickest on the circuit with a low 1:13.
Freeth looked for the road up the inside there, but Dennis Ireland, coming from the outside, held his line. And they're already breaking free of the third place man, who now is Gary Goodfellow.
Craig Trinder, the man who's lying second in the points, was last away from the grid from the front row there. Something obviously not right with the RGB Suzuki coming off the line there, and he's going to be a very disappointed man. Gary Goodfellow obviously making up for his earlier misfortunes there up into fourth position, but I think a very creditable ride already coming there from Steve Trinder in third, and these three are starting to displace themselves very quickly with just one of the 15 laps completed.
And Freeth has taken the lead. A very hard piece of riding from Freeth pushes him past Dennis Ireland.
Roger Freeth has said throughout this series that he was riding for points at the street circuits. He certainly has ridden very, very sensibly indeed and accumulated the points. And he said here at Manfield, where it's a little better suited to the machinery and the way he likes to ride, he was going to let it rip.
I think Roger Freeth is also capitalising on the enormous advantage that he has with an 1132cc engine over these 500 Grand Prix bikes. But obviously next year with the 750 limit coming into force, it's certainly going to change things as far as the Formula 1 class here in New Zealand's concerned.
But while Freeth is out in front and Dennis Ireland is in second place ahead of Steve Trinder, who's closing on him, I noticed that Des Barry has moved up to fifth place and is now challenging Gary Goodfellow in fourth. So Dennis Ireland in second place, just ahead of Trinder now. But Freeth seems to be getting away, and Trinder will be looking to pass Dennis Ireland. Under brakes at the end here, looks up the inside. Ireland has the better line, but Trinder's up the inside and takes second place, forcing Ireland to go wide. Very, very good piece of manoeuvring from
Very
Trinder.
tight corner from Steve Trinder. That was an excellent piece of riding. Now bear in mind this fellow is riding with a broken arm. He can't ride the bike, he says, to its full potential. He showed in practice that he's very, very quick indeed. He has some problem under brakes with his weight being pushed forward. He has to try and take it more on one wrist than the other. And he also has some problem in the infield with the change of direction, where he says that the bone clicks out of place, which doesn't sound very healthy. But he was hoping that the adrenaline could overcome the pain. The difficulty with Steve Trinder in this race is going to be whether or not he can last the 15 laps. Initially, the race was going to be 20 laps. It was shortened to 15, which suits his purpose as well. But he thought certainly in practice that 7 or 8 laps was about the maximum that that arm could take.
I believe that Steve Trinder is actually going to catch Roger Freeth. He's now some 0.8 of a second behind him, and he's dragging him in lap after lap. During practice this morning, he was right on the back of Freeth, and just look at the gap close up now. I think this man is doing an absolutely incredible job, not taking anything away from Roger Freeth. Leg 1 of the Wynns Formula 1 Series. Roger Freeth, the national champion, leads ahead of the Australian champion, Steve Trinder, who's closing on him lap after lap.
And in third place is Dennis Ireland, and closing on Dennis Ireland perhaps is Norris Farrow, who has now got past both Des Barry and Gary Goodfellow.
Well, the broken wrist wasn't enough for Steve Trinder to contend with. He also has a sprained ankle, which makes the gear changes just a little difficult. This is amazing riding. I think he's just had a go at Roger Freeth underneath. We'll see in a moment. Freeth comes out in front still. Here's Norris Farrow.
Ahead of Gary Goodfellow and Des Barry and Richard Scott, John Marsh. Obviously, Des Barry dropping back from his 4th position, but still the battle raging out the front. And Steve Trinder having a go at Roger Freeth. This is the big 100-mile-an-hour corner coming into the straight, and Roger Freeth is very aware that the Australian champion Trinder is right behind him.
And the Suzuki should be better on the brakes for 500, and he looks to go past Freeth up the inside the same as he passed Dennis Ireland, but he can't do it. Freeth holding onto his line. Now Trinder has the better drive out the corner and gets inside him. Trinder takes the lead. Superb manoeuvre. He got the drive out of the corner.
Well, the way he went past Dennis Ireland and the way he's just gone past Roger Freeth, that is phenomenal riding from Steve Trinder. The Australian champion against the New Zealand champion, Roger Freeth, through underneath him again. I just wonder how long Steve Trinder can last with the injuries. In practice, he was really getting tired and very sore after 7 or 8 laps, so this is a 15-lap race.
Perhaps Trinder's also working on the theory that he may want to win the race at the slowest possible speed. He knows that he can get Roger Freeth. He's probably sitting there working out the spots that he can actually get him on, and there he goes by him again. But he's trying to be as easy as he possibly can on his arms. It's amazing, this 500 Grand Prix bike up against an 11:32 4-stroke. But of course the weight advantage there with Trinder against the horsepower certainly must be telling at the moment.
Have a look at Roger Freeth on the entry to the back straight off Higgins. He comes up very, very high on that corner. Steve Trinder on the RGB Grand Prix bike takes a much tighter line and gets out of it on a different line. Roger Freeth goes right up on the top as if it was speedway.
And Freeth really has to get back on terms quickly. I don't believe he can race Trinder from behind. He has to get the big 4-stroke in front of the 500 machine. The 500's much lighter to handle and easier to put through these corners, and Freeth's only chance is to stick it up the inside and spoil his line, and if he can't do that, then I think Trinder's going to be able to get away from him. But Dennis Ireland still holding a very good 3rd place on his 500 Suzuki.
Dennis Ireland some 3.7 seconds behind Roger Freeth at the moment. The first heat of the Wynns Formula 1 motorcycles at 1/3 the distance. Steve Trinder joked to us earlier on the grid and said, I can last 10 laps, what's it going to cost me for to cut 5 laps off the race? But he's certainly doing a tremendous job out there.
Yes, he'll be trying to open up a little bit of a gap in case things get very, very difficult for him towards the end, and he wants to be able to relax. And that's just what he's doing, opening out a lead over the 2nd place man, Roger Freeth.
It's an astonishing ride from Steve Trinder. If you'd seen him at the track yesterday trying to get a new pair of leathers on with his broken arm, he looked in immense pain just trying to get the leathers on, let alone go out on a bike. And really nobody expected that he would be anywhere near competitive. He took the plaster off a couple of days ago, and he's just got a bandage on it at the moment.
Up to this point, the adrenaline has been pumping. Trinder's had the red mist in front of his eyes, if you like. He's had men in front of him to chase, and he's been in an almost desperate situation. But now he's in front, he's out on his own, and he'll start to think about things, and that's when the pain is going to start really hurting him. The adrenaline subsides, and as we watch Roger Freeth and Dennis Ireland pursuing him in 2nd and 3rd, he has a lot of things to worry about out in front now. But dropping back to watch Norris Farrow coming up in 4th place ahead of Richard Scott, doing very well on the superbike ahead of Gary Goodfellow.
Gary Goodfellow going considerably slower than we would have expected from him. He had good practice times yesterday. The bike should be competitive here.
I wonder whether Goodfellow's accident in the senior and the earlier Suzuki Masters upset him a bit, because he's now being pushed out by number 26.
It's John Marsh having a ride of his life there, number 26. And that's a great battle between Des Barry, Gary Goodfellow, John Marsh and Blair Briggs.
Steve Trinder now some 3.5 seconds ahead of Roger Freeth. Freeth in second, Dennis Island still in third, Norris Farrow having a good ride up there in fourth. Fifth back to Richard Scott. And in sixth position, John Marsh, followed by Gary Goodfellow and Des Barry.
Steve Trinder, obviously the plan is working for him at the moment, pulling out a little bit of a lead from Roger Freeth, which an optimist's view of would be that he can relax when they get to the last 3 or 4 laps. It doesn't really happen like that, but we're talking comparative to the way he started riding in the first early stages of the race. Looking over his shoulder to see how far away Roger Freeth is. Freeth is not too far behind. We'll get a little measure on the gap in a moment. 5 seconds. It was 2-3 laps ago. Luckily for Steve Trinder, the broken wrist is not the one that he uses for the throttle.
Freeth, of course, must consider that it is a lengthy race series, and he's still holding the advantage. Really, of course, Steve Trinder, no contest with him for the overall championship, and Freeth will be thinking more about that perhaps than this individual race. But he's always a great competitor, Freeth, and not one to give up easily, still pressing on.
1:12.4 the last lap. Getting into some of the back markers. Probably what's slowing them down. The lap record here for Formula One bikes is 1:10.4. That was Robert Holt last year, after the record had been jointly held by Dave Hiscock and Roger Freeth. So Roger Freeth is capable of quicker speeds at this circuit.
Freeth there riding his Bathurst winning Macintosh frame Suzuki.
Both he and Norris Farrow have Ken McIntosh, the builder of those frames, here in their pit crew.
Steve Trinder still well out in front. You can only wonder about how much pain he's getting from that wrist. And his problem is that he's got to keep up his concentration. That nagging pain will be trying to ruin his concentration, and the slightest slip will see him going down the road, which we obviously don't want to see happen here. Trinder forcing himself to keep going, forcing that concentration to keep accurately manoeuvring the machine around the circuit.
There is Steve Trinder looking back now for second place. There's Roger Freeth. Dennis Ireland in third place. And a big gap back to fourth place.
There's a man running across the circuit, but it's a lot further back to Richard Scott than it looks, thanks to the telephoto lens. There's Scott having a very good ride on a machine that's really not as fast as it might be in competition with these Formula One bikes, and that's Des Barry on his 500cc Yamaha, based on the RZ 500cc road bike, but very much modified with a Harris frame from England, and a lot of work being done on the engine.
He's another that was into good practice times around here and looking very comfortable yesterday, Des Barry, but not really in the hunt in terms of the front of the field.
Obviously, Norris Farrow has struck a problem there because he was up in a reasonably strong fourth place, but we can't see him anywhere on the circuit at this point.
Just another in a long tail of bad luck from Norris Farrow in this series.
Gary Goodfellow still circulating around with Des Barry.
Des really has developed a superb style on this 500. It's the style, of course, that took him to the British Formula 2 Championship on a smaller machine. Very, very neat indeed.
The race leader is still Steve Trinder. suffering his injury and doing exceedingly well. And just have a look at how big that gap is now back to Roger Freeth. So it's going to be touch and go for Steve Trinder as to whether or not he can last at this pace. The body must be really starting to tell him some stories now.
And if you notice, he's not crouching down behind the fairing quite as much as he was earlier in the race. He's trying to rest that wrist and not bend it so much.
Very, very difficult where he's got to swap and change direction like this. He was explaining to us earlier this morning how it sometimes goes click and you can't hear it, but you can feel it.
We've just seen Norris Farrow walk back to the pits without his bike. Perhaps a mechanical fault has stopped the very popular Aucklander.
Trinder, I wonder what his concentration is doing. He's spending a lot of time looking round now. Difficult for him to keep the concentration, as I was suggesting, with the pain nagging at him and no racing actually going on around him. And he's looking around a lot.
Maybe it would be easier if he had someone to race with.
Yes, I think it would have been easier, but he wanted to get away from Freeth. He's got two problems, the concentration being one of them, the other being the fact that he didn't want to get into a knockdown, drag-out fight right to the finish, which would have been a lot more tiring.
Second, obviously able to pull away from second place Roger Freeth, and Roger Freeth's pace hasn't decreased, but Steve Trinder is getting away from it. So if anything, Steve Trinder's pace has increased in the last 2 laps.
Craig Trinder, who started today's first heat of the Wynns Formula 1 race on 53 points, 11 behind Roger Freeth. He was last away from the grid and he's now up into 7th position.
And of course the bike that you see here is basically a very similar machine to that which has been raced by a lot of famous men to world championships. Graham Crosby raced one in Europe. Randy Momola has used it. Marco Lucanelli won the world championship on it, as did Franco Ancini. So a lot of illustrious men have ridden the 500 RGB Suzuki, similar to this bike being used by Steve Trinder.
I think the fact that they've got to a Mark 8 is a reasonable indication of its durability as a Grand Prix machine.
Yes, they've been developing it through the years, and it's only now that next year Suzuki are looking at an entirely different engine. It's been going for a long time.
The gap now between first and second stands at 7 seconds between Trinder and Roger Freeth.
This RGB, the Grand Prix bike that Peter Clifford was just talking about, the 2-stroke water-cooled Square 4, 2 cylinders in front, 2 behind.
And this bike very, very different. A lot of it made in New Zealand here. Ken McIntosh works out of a workshop in Auckland. Beautifully made machine around the production-based Suzuki 4-cylinder air-cooled engine.
Roger Freeth's example, 1135 cc's. They're getting somewhere around 140 horsepower, which is an enormous amount on 2 wheels. And Ken McIntosh's speciality is the box section frame, the swing arm of which has been the outstanding feature, giving incredible rigidity with very high horsepower, good traction. Certainly an improvement on the basic production model. White flag held out at this stage. So Steve Trinder on the last lap, and it looks like he's going to survive till the end of the race quite happily. I wonder if there might not have been a little bit of tactics and a little bit of foxing in saying that he could only last 6 or 7 laps, because certainly that was the talk of the pits before the race. And he's now coming around to take the checkered flag on this lap.
Yes, he certainly hasn't put a foot wrong. Beautifully ridden. The way he swept past Roger Freeth was very, very spectacular indeed. Trying to dive inside him going into the corner. When that failed, he just drove out better than Freeth could manage and swept past him on the straight.
This is the race leader, Steve Trinder, down the back straight for the last time in the first heat of the Wynns Formula 1. Through the sweeper. Beautiful flowing lines through there and heading down toward the checkered flag.
I wonder if we can get a look at Steve Trinder when he gets his helmet off and have a look at what kind of anguish is on his face. I'm sure there must be a lot of pain there at the moment. He's got all night to recover with 2 more races tomorrow, but what astonishing form. Dennis Ireland third, Roger Freeth second. That's an amazing race from Steve Trinder. He looked right from the first lap as though he was able to get past Roger Freeth, and it only took him a couple to reel him in, get in the lead and then consolidate. And just in case he ran out of energy or the pain took over from the adrenaline later in the race, as it turned out, he held his concentration, he held his line beautifully, he didn't make one tiny error, and he has won the first Formula One race of the Man
500 Grand Prix machine. And as we suggested, these 500 Suzuki's very difficult machines to beat around here, and Freeth did exceptionally well, I think, to get his second place between the 500 Suzuki's of Trinder and Ireland.
Steve Trinder sitting there on his bike. We'll, if he gets his helmet off in time, we'll see if we can have a look. He seems quite happy at the moment, but I'm sure he is a sore man. That's brand new leathers he's got there. He made a mess of the old ones, and just trying to get the leathers on in the pits yesterday, he was in considerable pain. New leathers, of course, being very stiff and a little difficult to get on till you've ridden in them for a while and stretched them. But he and brother Craig were battling for quite a while to get him into these. You can see the bandage there on his wrist. He took the plaster off yesterday. The plaster didn't give him enough flexibility to be able to ride, certainly on the in section where you've got to change direction quickly.
Dennis Ireland alongside him on the Wang Suzuki having a bit of a chat, and one of the marshals chatting to Trinder. He obviously hasn't got the strength left in that arm.
Yes, I think the pain probably starting to mount up on him now that the adrenaline from the race is starting to go. We'll see if we can get a word with Steve Trinder. He's prepared to talk to us. I think it'll be a mixture of pain and happiness down there. Roger Freeth, another good ride from him. Not able to match Trinder on the day and in the race, but still with enough points lead not to be threatened by Steve Trinder. Because of the spill that Trinder had, his points total went way down. And Roger Freeth, who was sitting at the head of the field as they started this race in Formula One, Freeth had 64, Craig Trinder had 53. Craig Trinder had a very bad start and didn't really feature in the race there. He got up to about 6th place. Robbie Dean had 44, Dennis Ireland 41, Richard Scott 30 and Gary Goodfellow 29. So Roger Freeth has consolidated his lead with that 2nd place because Steve Trinder didn't feature in the first 6 or 7 in terms of points. If he can get his helmet off in time, we'll get a word with the man from Australia.